Every legend has an origin story, and as is the case for the Beatles, they have their origin bands, ranging from the Quarrymen all the way to the Beatles we now know and love. Today we're going to show you 10 very interesting facts about the early Beatles. Let's do it. Formed by John Lennon in Liverpool in 1956, the Quarrymen was a skiffle rock and roll group that would lead to creating the Beatles. The name comes from a line in their high school Quarrybank school song. Before they donned this name, John had considered calling them the Blackjacks for a moment, but switched it out once they performed publicly. The only Beatles that were in the band from the beginning was just John Lennon, until he meets Paul at one of the Quarrymen's performances at St. Peter's Church in Woolton. Then, Paul recommended George Harrison in early 1958, although John wasn't too sure, seeing that George was only 14 years old. From there, they switched the name briefly from the Quarrymen to Johnny and the Moondogs. At that point, they had been playing gigs and house parties, but had a keen eye for attempting to win contests. One of these contests being Carol Levi's Star Search. For the audition, they called themselves Johnny and the Moondogs. Even though John didn't have his guitar on him because it was broken, they were able to pass the first round of competition in Liverpool, and so they were invited to the finals in Manchester. They performed Think It Over by Buddy Holly, but didn't stay till the end of the competition to hear the results. Funny enough, as they were leaving the concert, John saw an electric guitar by the stage door and straight up stole it, stating, "At least it wasn't a total loss." Also, for a brief moment after this, they changed from Johnny and the Moondogs to Japaji 3. Not 100% sure how to pronounce that one. That name was based on the first letters of its members named John, Paul, and George. But they thankfully dropped that. Now, after loads of different names, we're finally getting close to the actual final form of the Beatles. John wanted a name that would sound English, so he asked Paul if the Crickets would work as a name. Paul laughed and said he thought that it already had been taken. It was Stuart Sutcliffe who used that bit of a pun to recommend the Beatles. During their Hamburg touring years, they went mostly by the Silver Beatles. Many club promoters thought the silver would make them more appealing than just the Beatles, but eventually John changed it back to just the Beatles after exploring spelling it like this. During the Hamburg years, they really had to climb towards success for quite a while. It was never easy. The Beatles arrived on an August morning in 1960 in the St. Pauli area of Hamburg, Germany. After securing a club to perform in, they were told they could sleep in the storeroom of the Bambino Cinema, which was not very awesome to say the least. Paul says, "We lived backstage in the Bambino, next to the toilets, and you could always smell them. The room had been an old storeroom, and there were just concrete walls and nothing else. No heat, no wallpaper, not a lick of paint, and 2 sets of bunk beds with not very much covers. We were frozen." John jumps in to put his own 2 cents in by saying, "We were put in this pigsty. We were living in a toilet, like right next to the ladies' toilet. We'd go to bed late and be woken up the next day by the sound of the cinema show and old German fraus pissing next door." It is said that when they would wake up in the morning, they would have to use the urinal for washing and shaving themselves. It should also be mentioned that this is where that infamous condom torch came from. After George was ratted out for being under the legal age limit to be working and scheduled for deportation, Pete Best and Paul went back to the cinema to get their stuff. Seeing that all the lights were off, they took a condom and attached it to a nail on the wall. They ignited it to illuminate the room where their possessions lay. No damage was done, but this led to them being deported as well. Sadly, this lovely woman passed away this year in May. ASTRID was a fantastic photographer who artistically documented some of the Beatles' earliest moments. She was also the inspiration for them to don these iconic hairstyles. Now, ASTRID doesn't claim she invented it. She says, "All that rubbish people said that I created their hairstyle, that's rubbish. Lots of German boys had that hairstyle. Stuart had it for a long while and the others copied it. I suppose the most important thing I contributed to them was friendship. All my friends in art school used to run around with this sort of what you call Beatles haircut, and my boyfriend then, Klaus Vormann, had this hairstyle and Stuart liked it very much. He was the first one who really got the nerve to get Brile cream out of his hair and asking me to cut his hair for him. Pete Best has really curly hair and it wouldn't work. After ASTRID cut Stu's hair, George Harrison asked her to do the same for him, and John and Paul had it cut in that style in Paris by ASTRID's friend. Before dressing smart in suits and ties, the boys were a much more rugged band of musicians, conforming to the Teddy Boy style of clothing. Teddy Boys was a mainly British subculture, and the Beatles emulated this fashion by wearing leather and trendy articles of clothing. Take a look at some of these interesting photos from that time period. Not only would Ringo join the band, making those four the official Beatles, but he had also sat in at performances at the Cavern Club and even jumped in on drums when Pete Best couldn't make it. Ringo was successful on his own as he played with Rory and the Hurricanes and had quite good notoriety, so when the band decided to replace Pete Best with STARR, the Cavern Club often had protests, such as people hollering "Pete forever, Ringo never." Now this one is definitely weird. In the early years, the Beatles ended up performing music for a stripper from Manchester. In those days, the Beatles had a part-time manager named Alan Williams. In July of 1960, Alan had opened a new club called the New Cabaret Artists Club, basically a strip club of that time period. Alan hired a woman named Janice to strip for the patrons of the club. It has been said her real name is Shirley. That's a deep reference. Alan asked the boys if they would play her backing music for the week. The boys negotiated a price they thought was fair, and when Alan balked at the amount and asked why so much, Paul replied, "For the indignity, the bloody indignity of it all." Dude, playing live music at a cabaret is good fun. Well, anyway, after Janice would take a bow, she would turn around and face the Beatles. Paul says, "She would turn around completely starkers. We were just lads. We didn't know where to put ourselves." After witnessing the Beatles at the Cavern Club in 1961, A&R representative Mike Smith invited the band to enjoy a session at their studios in London. After a windy, snowy trip, they arrived and began recording the DECCA recordings. However, the Beatles were nervous and they felt they didn't perform their best, although they were still confident they would get the deal. But the label decided to go with Brian Poole and the Tremolos, and the head of A&R even saying to Brian Epstein, "Guitar groups are on the way out." Dick explains his choice by saying, "I told Mike he'd have to decide between them. It was up to him, the Beatles or Brian Poole and the Tremolos. He said, they're both good, but one's a local group, the other comes from Liverpool. We decided it was better to take the local group. We could work with them more easily and stay closer in touch as they came from nearby." But don't feel too bad for Dick Rowe. He did eventually give a deal to the Rolling Stones at George Harrison's suggestion. For this last fact, I want to leave you with what the boys said once they achieved their first glimmer of fame and fortune. How they believed it would end up going, where the whole thing would end up. It really gives perspective on how they saw the future. When asked in a 1963 interview, "How long do you think your fame will last?" these were their responses. John says, "Yeah, we're gonna last 10 years. But as soon as you've said that, you think, well, we're lucky if we last 3 months, you know?" Paul said they couldn't keep playing songs like From Me to You forever, but he worried by saying, at 40, we may not know how to write songs anymore. George says, "We don't know. It may be next week. It may be 2 or 3 years. But I think we'll be in the business either up there or down there for at least another 4 years. And finally, Ringo says brilliantly, "I've always fancied having a ladies' hairdressing salon." Well, that's all for today, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed the show, and we'll catch you later. Bye.